Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
Exceptionally well, thanks for asking, Rory. Rory and I are delighted that you've joined us for the Counselling Tutor Podcast, episode 277. Exciting topics for you today, starting off with our student services, where we acknowledge the study journey. And today we're going to be speaking about confidentiality, not secrecy, he says after that. We then move on to our ethical, sustainable practice. This is where we acknowledge that building, running, scaling a practice, we often don't learn those topics during our core counselling training, so we speak about them here. And today we're going to be speaking about all things payment related. So taking payments, cash, card, using online payment apps, all of that kind of stuff. And then we go into practice matters. That is the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. You can note that down on your CPD tracker for your ethical organisation. And today we're going to be hearing from Nicola Currie, who's speaking about those basics of setting up a private practice. So lots for everybody today. Starting us off in those student services, Rory, when we say confidentiality, we're not talking about keeping secrets, are we?
We're not. I mean, we do keep the clients' secrets, but I think it boils down to confidentiality is within a distinct contracted frame. So there is a understanding right at the beginning of therapy or skills practice. If you're doing your skills practice, maybe in your college or the university, maybe you're doing an introduction course and you're just starting off. Contracting is the basis of confidentiality. So you speak about a contract, and in that contract, you'll say what the exceptions to confidentiality are. And once those are understood by both parties, if it's a skills session, the speaker and the listener, or if you're in practice, the client and the counsellor or the person who's helping, then anything can be said within those frameworks. But if someone says something or discloses something, which in the contract you say that you must break confidentiality for, then you have to. And for those who are working in agencies, maybe those who are doing their practice hours and they're working, in an agency, most agencies, in my experience, have a clause that said, I have to break confidentiality if I believe you're going to do harm to yourself or others. That's pretty much a standard in a lot of, certainly every organisation I've ever worked in or worked for. So there are distinct differences between confidentiality and secrecy, and I think as a best practice as a student, find out what those are. Be absolutely clear what those are before you engage in any form of skills work or any form of practice work. Find out, because there's been through history there has been cases where people have not broken confidentiality, and I'm thinking of the case of Victoria Climbier, who I think it was about 20 years ago, was a young girl who was treated appallingly by her relatives and ended up being killed by them. And everybody knew there was something going on, but everybody seemed to be very worried about saying anything because of confidentiality. And that, of course, informed what was called the Caldecott principles, which we might talk about in a different podcast. However, make sure you know the difference between confidentiality and secrecy and what you have to disclose.
I love how you've opened this topic, Rory. Looking at that really important part of this process, which is the contract. It always goes back to the contract. And I guess we start off by maybe exploring why confidentiality is useful. And the reason confidentiality is useful, and I'm talking about limited or boundaried confidentiality according to the legislation within your country. Maybe the agency that you're working with will have boundaries where confidentiality needs to be broken. But we'll discuss that in a moment. But within that bubble of confidentiality, contracted confidentiality, it ensures that the client can feel safe and secure to disclose their personal information without them having a fear that it's going to be divulged to others. And that is a very, very specialist kind of environment in life. If you think about speaking to a friend or sharing maybe struggles you're going through with a loved one or a family member, chances are that they may speak to somebody else about that. But having that contracted confidentiality offers room to explore within the boundaries of that confidentiality anything that the client chooses to bring into their session. And that can be very liberating for a client, feeling free to be able to speak. And I guess when we're speaking about the boundaries of that confidentiality, it's really important that you have a look at what the boundaries might be for you. So it's no good kind of reaching out and maybe getting a template-based contract for your counselling and thinking that you can work from that. You need to look at a lot of different things. So number one, you need to look at the law that governs the area or the country that you are working in. You also need to keep in mind your agency's policies, and different agencies will have different policies around where confidentiality may need to be broken. And of course, this would need to be weaved into the contract. Why? Because the client then knows about it. It kind of shows them a boundary of that suggests that if they step over that boundary, you would be forced to break that confidentiality. And then, Rory, before we go on to more, I'm just going to revisit what you mentioned. If you're working in the United Kingdom, be aware of what the Caldecott principles are, how they work, what it means when you're asked for information about a client from another agency or another government organization, or indeed by the law, by somebody operating within the law. There are certain rules that govern how that information is shared, and we call that the Caldecott principles. And then I think, Rory, what's really important when we are contracting around this confidentiality is the informed consent from the client, ensuring they understand it, they get it, they understand where the limits lie, where those boundaries are, and getting them to put their signature on that contract, a date on that contract. That shows that you have informed consent. If you at a later stage need to break confidentiality because a client did step over that boundary and you are mandated by agency, law, whatever it may be, you have informed consent that you have told the client about this so that they're not in a position to open a complaint against you and say they didn't know. And I think kind of weaved into that, Rory, is about keeping really secure records about what was said to a client, what was discussed with a client. You might put in your records or in your notes, I shared the contract with the client. I really looked over where I would need to break confidentiality. The client agreed to those, as can be seen in the contract, would give you another, I guess, defendable decision-making document if you were called to book for breaking confidentiality.
Absolutely, and also I think it's ever so good practice. Well, I think it's good practice in my practice. In the, if you contract in the first session, to just gently revisit it in the second session, just to ask, is there any questions about confidentiality, any questions about the contract? And usually, I mean, in my experience, the clients have said, no, there isn't. But again, you put that in your notes. You say, I've just revisited it. And the client didn't have any concerns regarding the contract. And then if you have to break confidentiality, you've got more evidence for a defensible decision. Because if you've ever called before a professional body, one of the things they will ask you is, what did you note? What was your contract? So it's really, really important that you kind of get your ducks in a row. And I think it's also important that if you work with specific agencies, you get a very clear understanding of confidentiality. So, for instance, if you work in a school, you may be working as part of a multidisciplinary team, and their levels of confidentiality may be different to working with adults. So you need to find out from whoever is leading the the support services, or the pastoral services is sometimes mentioned in schools. What are the limits of confidentiality? And then that might have to adapt your contract. If you've been working with adults, you go and work with children. You may have to adapt your contract for that. So I think it's an interesting one. I don't know about you, Ken, but in our experience of teaching, it did sometimes feel like we were working for MI5, because people were very worried about disclosing a first name. I can remember doing a practice discussion group where someone mentioned the first name of the client. So the name was, it wasn't this name, but we'll say Paul, which is a kind of very generic name here in the UK. And the anxiety about confidentiality being broken was palpable. And I said, well, we can't take back what's been said. Someone said, I saw his client's called Paul, and everybody went, oh, no, you can't say that. And I said, well, we can't take back what's said. I said, but what you have to now think about, this is a learning opportunity. How could you identify this person called Paul? Could you identify who that person is? And of course they couldn't. The only person who could identify Paul was the person who brought it. And, that's what it's about, not identifying clients, not making sure that a client comes to you and they have a reasonable expectation that within the contract, everything they say is confidential. And that allows them to speak freely, to talk about what they want, and in the knowledge that it just stays in the room. And I think that is an important ingredient of therapy, isn't it? How often have we, work with clients where they've got stuff off the chest about loved ones or their work or their sexuality or any aspect that's causing them difficulty, and to be able to know that what's been said isn't going to go any further.
It's a very powerful environment, that having that confidentiality, being able to share. And it can sometimes be a double-edged sword. You've mentioned instances where confidentiality maybe need to be broken within certain client groups or certain settings. And I'm thinking back to when I worked in a college for some time. One of the things that was a regular presentation within a college environment was self-harm. And we kind of started this topic speaking about harm to self, harm to others as being a reason to break confidentiality. And I remember wrestling with this and speaking with the pastoral team and having a really good chat about finding myself a little wiggle room on that break of confidentiality to allow for potentially a student to come forward and share a secret that they've never shared with another human being before, saying, there are times when I might cut myself for relief from the stress or anxiety that I'm feeling, to be able to work with that person rather than them suddenly being surrounded by an entirely different group of people just on the first sharing of that information. And I was able to negotiate that with the institution that I was working within. And that's the important point here. It would not have been appropriate if I had just felt that was okay. It was done in collaboration with the organization. So there's an example within an organizational setting where sometimes you might want to look and negotiate for a little bit of wiggle room if it is appropriate, you feel it's appropriate, and they feel it is appropriate as well. And then I'm looking back to training. When we're training to become counselors, psychotherapists, we discuss confidentiality in great depth. And confidentiality lies outside of just our contract and how we behave. It also applies to our environment. For instance, can the conversation we're having within a room where we're offering counseling be overheard if somebody is standing outside through the door? So we would look at that. Could somebody walk past, see in the window and see that somebody was sat having counseling? So we would take those things into consideration. So I'm not going to go deeply into those. But what I did want to touch on was how the environment can affect confidentiality, and then link that, Rory, into thinking digitally. We now live in an age where online or telephone counseling is a norm, and we need to think differently around confidentiality if we are working digitally, Rory.
We do, and that I think speaks to the tools we use. So many years ago when I started, I always say this in the podcast, many years ago when I started being a therapist, life was a little easier because you just met in the room and that was it. The only thing you had to worry about was could it be overheard? Could anybody see it? That was pretty much it. Now we live in a digital age where certainly since the pandemic, more and more people have gone online for therapy. And there's a lot of questions asked about the tools, the digital tools we use. How confidential are they? How secure are they? And this is a question that keeps coming up. We may buy a subscription to a digital video platform, name names, but how do you know it's secure? How do you know that the information that the client's sharing isn't being listened into by a third party or being scraped by a bot and used for something else? Because there's an old saying that if you get something for free on the internet, you are the product. In other words, you don't get anything, you don't get out for nout, as they say in Yorkshire. And there's a very good possibility that you're being used to generate profit in a different area, Ken.
Very much so. And there's never been a more important time where we need to look at the digital platforms that we might use to serve a client. And that starts with an email, as simple as an email. Are you emailing a client? Are they contacting you when they want to engage with your services? And are you replying and asking them for information over email? Because if you are, it's then our responsibility to look at who our email provider is. And as you quite rightly said, Rory, if you're using something like a Gmail email account, Gmail is provided free of charge, but it is, when you kind of look at the terms and conditions when you're signing up for Gmail, it implies that the information within your inbox can be looked at and that your contacts information can be looked at. So it's really worth having a look at this. And we'll see, you mentioned the Facebook page. Confidentiality comes up often on our Facebook page, and I noticed recently there was a discussion around use of email providers and paying for those email providers, and somebody quite legitimately saying, why should I pay for something like Proton Mail or Hush Mail, which are confidential online email providers that kind of hold that confidentiality? And it was very encouraging to see the amount of comments coming in suggesting that it is worth it in holding that confidentiality. You also touched on if you're working online and you're working with a video platform, how or where is that information stored? If does that video platform capture any information? We have to think a lot differently to we would if we were just within four walls where we can control and see everything going on. When we're working electronically or digitally, we often can't see what is behind the application that we are using. Very often, many of the applications may be based in a different jurisdiction to yours, fall under different laws to what you operate in within your practice. So, for example, Rory and I are both based in the United Kingdom, and we have certain data laws that we need to follow, and there is United Kingdom General Data Protection Regulation, as it is called. Yet there are applications that we will not use because they are not compliant to those laws. So I wouldn't want to be putting in a client's details or chatting to a client via those applications. So there's more and more we have to read those terms and conditions and understand where the data is being stored. It's where that data is being transferred to and how it is being stored that is really, really important. So that's about thinking digitally, and I guess being aware of the potential risks involved with using those digital tools. And then, of course, we come on to disposing of the records. We're called upon to hold this confidential information for a certain amount of time, and you'd look to your ethical body to kind of advise you on how long that might be, depending on the client group you might be working with. But there comes a time where we no longer need it, and you may have them in paper form that have been in a filing cabinet, or you may have them digitally stored on a secured hard drive that has a password protection. How do we dispose of those records in such a way that data cannot be accessed after we have disposed of it, Rory?
Yeah, it's a very good point. And I think it's a good point to remind ourselves here that the origins of the 1997 Data Protection Act, the forerunner of General Data Protection Regulations, or GDPR, was enacted because a hospital threw their medical records on a tip.
Yep.
And people's medical details were blowing around a tip. And that made the papers, and of course, there was a big scandal about it, and so the law was framed. But yeah, how do we dispose of this information? And if we're making paper notes, then those could be destroyed by a shredder, or in my case, I can put them on my wood burner and they go literally up in smoke. But if it's digital, how do you get rid of them? Where are they stored? Where do you store your digital notes? If you're taking a document and you're writing a document and storing it somewhere, is the place it's stored secure? And once something is put onto the internet, you can never get it back, really. Once it's been released on the internet, it's there it can be there forever. I don't want to scare people. So thinking about how to secure your data, where you're going to put those notes, those digital notes. And also, when it comes time, usually after, I think, 7 years in the UK, to delete them, how are you going to do that? And also, how are you going to notarize the deletion? Are you going to make some notes, general notes, saying deleted client notes from 2013 to 2018? And just make a note of that. And you're right, Ken, it is something that comes up a lot in our Facebook page. And if you want to join our Facebook page, it's Counselling Tutor into Facebook. You'll find us, knock on the door, and you'll see a lot of those conversations of sustainable ethical practice.
Yeah, there's a lot more that we could discuss on this. We could probably do a whole podcast just on the topic of confidentiality. I'm going to touch on one last one as we kind of move away from this, and it's the transportation of records, and sometimes the not consciously transporting the records. So what do I mean by that? So let's say, for instance, that I keep my client notes safely secured on my laptop on my hard drive, and I only ever use my laptop to see my clients in my counseling room. I'm now seeing them online using an online secure video platform to see them. I make my notes and I store those notes, and I think, there we go, job done, that's been saved. And now I have a CPD conference that I need to go to. So I take my laptop and I put it in my car and I drive to the conference, because I also use my laptop for taking notes and for checking on my emails during breaks at a conference. What happens if my laptop gets lost, stolen? We just need to, I guess, think about the transportation of records. There's times when we might purposely transport records and we would put an arrangement in place, but I think it's that transportation of records where we're maybe not conscious of it and we're not thinking of it at the time until, of course, something goes wrong. Where's my laptop gone? Oh no, it's got all my clients' notes and records on there. So that is, I think, just yet another thing to be aware of. And Rory, I think it's maybe a good place here to put in that we recognized this challenge around confidentiality, about data compliance, specifically here in the United Kingdom, UK GDPR compliance. And we decided to do something about it ourselves. We went and we found a coder or a developer, call it, and we built from the ground up, built by counsellors for counsellors, a compliance system that keeps records and notes anonymous. It keeps them encrypted, and it takes away a lot of those risks, Rory.
Yes, absolutely. And we've spent a lot of time making it secure by design. It's specially made for the job of keeping counsellors' records. We've spent a lot of time making sure they're kept on the appropriate servers, that there's a very, very, very sophisticated encryption system. And just to talk to your point, Ken, on the laptop, if you've got lots of people have one computer per house, it means that if someone if a little person is looking for Netflix or whatever, they can't accidentally find your client notes because it's secured via a password. So even if your computer's lost or someone accesses it without your knowledge, without the password, they cannot access the notes. So, or any of the data that's stored within it, maybe names and addresses and telephone numbers or referrals to other professionals, it is very, very well secured. And I think that gives a lot of people peace of mind. I use it all the time in my practice, and I tell you what, it does half give me peace of mind.
Yeah, we also built a telehealth video platform into that as well. If you're interested in having a look, it's just coming to release now. So it's been 3 years in the building. It's been over a year in testing with therapists giving us feedback and using it in their actual client work. It is called Therapy Lock, and you can learn more about that by going to CounsellingTutor.com. But there's another reason to go to CounsellingTutor.com, and that's to get the super duper handout that Rory has created on confidentiality. And it covers what we've discussed, plus reporting of breaches, that being aware of the risks of social media, your continuing professional development that you can do around confidentiality and compliance, how to handle exceptions to the rule, what happens when you get a tricky situation and you don't know how to handle that. Also talks about physical environment. So that is a really comprehensive handout with 15 really thought-provoking points for you to consider. It's called Good Confidentiality. Can't say the word. Good confidentiality habits for counselors. And you get that by going to CounsellingTutor.com. Click on the podcast tab. Find your way to today's episode, which is episode 277, and download it. It is free. It is yours to have, and it's really worth revisiting confidentiality from time to time. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Have you ever wondered if you're using counselling skills effectively? Confidentiality means we rarely see skills used by others, so it's no wonder that so many students say they lack confidence in their counselling skills. That's why I built Counselling Skills Academy. Counselling Skills Academy is an online course that you can do at your own pace. It will give you the skills competence and confidence to know that you're using your skills most effectively. You will see real counselling skills used by a counsellor in real life sessions, covering everything from how risk is assessed right through to working towards an appropriate ending. Visit CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com to learn more and to claim your counselling tutor discount. That's CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. And I guess that brings us to the end of Student Services and right on to that ethical, sustainable practice where we speak about, Rory, taking payment.
Yes, money for goods, as my old boss used to say. It's money for goods, Rory. And the thing is that it's quite interesting, isn't it? When you're a student, as we discussed in other podcasts, there's a lot of things that you have to learn when you become a private practitioner. And one of those things is the fact that you now paying for your time. Your time is being paid for. You spent a lot of time, a lot of money, gaining the qualifications, developing the skills, doing all the assignments. Now you're in private practice, you're maybe working for yourself, and it may feel a little odd to ask for money. It may feel a little difficult. And I will disclose here, the first time I actually asked for payment was about 7 or 8 years ago, because I'd worked for organizations, I'd had some paid work, but I never actually said to a client, can you pay me? And it felt a little odd. And I know I'm not the only person within this profession who thinks that it's a bit odd to ask for payments. And when I worked at the college, I was a senior lecturer, and I used to go and observe lessons for people out in the brickwork department or the carpentry department. And the tutors would say, of course, when people are paying for this, and, you'll be charged so much an hour for doing this. It was quite a regular thing. It's sometimes not mentioned in counselling training, but you deserve to be paid for your work, and if someone's come to you privately and you've advertised your fee and you've contracted, again, there's the contract, the fee is in the contract, then you deserve to be paid for it. And I think it's about being upfront, and calling. I call the cost of therapy when I charge a client a fee. I think that makes it very professional. It sounds like you are a professional person, and also there is a tricky time when clients have had a really difficult session, and they get to the end and they may be upset, and they start to walk out without paying. That has to be handled very, very delicately, very delicately indeed, Ken.
Yes, that's a really nice point that you've made there, Rory. And I think asking for payment starts with examining what your own relationship is with money. From the it's got to be hundreds, if not thousands, of people that we've spoken to over the years or corresponded with, Rory. There seems to be a majority that do this because they feel called to it. They want to make a difference in the world. We don't go into this wanting to become millionaires and get rich, but at the same time, as you've quite rightly said, Rory, we need to be paid for our time. It's unlikely that your formal counselling training said, you're studying to become a counsellor? Oh, then it's all free then. You don't have to pay for your training because it's all free because you're going to do good in the world. It is the currency of transactions in our world that we pay for what we do. We pay to study, and the clients, if we're in private practice, will pay to come and see us. But when we look to ourselves, what is our relationship with asking for money and receiving money for these services that we give out? And that's a really interesting place to explore. You can journal about that. You can speak to peers about that and be really honest about how it is for you. You've quite rightly said, Rory, you're going to contract. You're going to say in your contract what the fee is, but also how that fee is paid. And certainly in my own practice, I found it most comfortable to contract for a fee in advance. And the reason that I took a fee in advance, in other words, that the client had paid by the time that they came into the session. The reason for that is for the exact scenario that you painted, Rory. Really tough session. And it could even be a really amazing session where the client has a breakthrough. It's a significant session where the client is in a certain mindset. It can feel quite disruptive. For me, this is my relationship with this transaction to say, yeah, that's great, but can I have some money now, please? And not that I would word it that way at all. I'm being very, very blunt here, but it's kind of, that's the basis of the transaction. And therefore, I contracted for fee in advance so that the end of the session, the client just left. And of course, to be able to do that, I needed to look at how that fee was going to be taken. And my preferred method was online payments, and there are a number of apps available that you can use to take online payments and send invoices in advance. Others that I have networked with and spent some time with choose to take payment on invoice post session. Again, that the client would receive an invoice that they then needed to pay within a certain amount of time, which is a common business practice. And I think although it still does happen, I think it's becoming rarer that a client might pay in cash within the room. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen, and it may be happening in your practice, but we're moving more and more towards a cashless society. We needed to pay cash for something quite recently, and it was quite disruptive, to be honest with you, Rory. We had to go to the bank machine and draw the money specifically for this transaction, because we don't usually carry cash around. We use our cards and online payment. So I think it's an interesting time with the technology that is available to consider how you take payment.
Yes, indeed. And you know, talking to colleagues who've been in private practice, some operate a system where they pay for a session, clients pay for a session in advance. So they'd pay, say it's £50 a session, they'd pay £100, and then that would be that session and the next session. And of course, if the client did turn up for that session in your contract, if you wish to put it in, you could have a clause that said that, you know, if it's a no-show, then the fee is, the fee is, so you take the fee. And the reason for that is you're giving up an hour of your time. I can't get this over too strongly. My plumber, which I've talked about when it comes to counselling towers occasionally, doesn't hesitate to ask for payments, and because it's his job, it's his work. And I think it's about a mindset. If you're setting up in private practice, you're a small business, and small businesses rely on cash flow, and it's about the money. And also, is there anything in the contract about a no-show? If a client doesn't turn up, cancellation, if you don't cancel within 24 hours, then in some contracts, the fee is still payable. So it's about, I think it really is about thinking about, as Ken said, your relationship to money, but also making that really, really clear in your contract how much the client's paying, when they're paying, and do they pay for a session in advance, and what's the no-show clause? If someone doesn't turn up, do you still invoice them? And I think those are the things that should be put in. And one other observation. If you've got a joint bank account, I know a lot of people don't have joint bank accounts now, but a bit of disclosure here, we do in our house have a joint bank account. Is it a good idea to have the client paying money into a joint bank account? Because if someone looks at the bank statement and says, well, who's Fred Smith, and why have they paid you £60? That becomes a very difficult conversation, doesn't it? It becomes a very, very difficult conversation, because you go, is that a client? And you go, well, yes. And then you go, is that Fred Smith from down the road? And before long, you're into quite a difficult position. So think about maybe opening a separate bank account for your private practice. Think about that. Or using an online bank, a separate online bank for your private practice. And the advantage of that is all your earnings are in one place, so you can see how much you've earned when you come to pay your tax. But getting the mindset of valuing yourself enough to be paid for the work you do is something that comes naturally to some people, and I think some people have to work on, Ken.
Yeah, very much so, Rory. And you've mentioned the joint bank account, and that it's interesting. Our next topic when we're going to Practice Matters is about setting up private practice. And one of the things you'll consider when kind of starting a private practice is how you're going to register your company for taxation purposes, and how you're going to set up your bank account to service your business as it was. And so not the best of practice to use a personal bank account for taking payments, specifically if there are other eyes on it. But there's this further consideration as well, and that is if you do have a business account and the fees are paid into that business account, who gets to see that? Do you have a bookkeeper? Do you have an accountant who looks over that? So it's what eyes are on that bank account. If we're speaking about confidentiality, which we covered in student services in this very podcast today,
yes.
we're wanting to hold all of the identifying details of that client as confidential. So we wouldn't want a first name and a second or surname out and somebody else looking at that. And of course, it's pretty easily manageable that you can kind of look at it yourself and just declare it as client fees in one lump sum, rather than having somebody else going through your bank account and looking at each transaction that may very well bear a person's name. So it's just, I guess, a further consideration of how we protect our clients, but in this case, linked into that, how we take payments. And I think payments, Rory, very much part of being in private practice. If you're working in an agency or as a placement counsellor, chances are you're not needing to ask for those payments. There's another mechanism in place if it's within an agency, or in placement, of course, you may be delivering that service for free. But within private practice, we would be asking for payment. And I guess that is a lovely segue into our next section, which is Practice Matters. This is the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. And today's topic is setting up private practice. It's those basics that we need to have in place to start a private practice. And Rory, you met up with Nicola Currie, who spoke about this topic.
I did. Nicola has done a fab lecture for the Counselling CPD Library on, I guess, the basics of setting up a private practice. I caught up with her, and this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice, that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
There's a lot of people who leave their studies and go out into the world looking for work, but there are those people who want to set up in private practice, and for some it can feel really daunting. There seems to be lots of information that's needed, and it can really feel a bit scary. How much do you charge? What's your time worth? So I'm delighted to be joined today by Nicola Currie, who has done a fantastic lecture for the Counsellor CPD Library on setting up in private practice. So Nicola, thank you for joining us.
Rory, thank you very much for inviting me along. I'm really delighted to be here.
Well, we're delighted you're here. And you've done a lecture on setting up in private practice. And in my introduction, I said it can feel quite daunting. Is that the kind of sense you get from people you speak to?
Oh my goodness, of course. It can be so overwhelming to actually know where to start. And because there is a lot of things that we need to put in place to get set up in private practice if we want to do it properly. But when I actually think back to my own life, I qualified a long time ago. I think it was 2005. And it took me 4 years to believe that somebody would actually pay me, because we're so used to, in the counselling world, offering our services free of charge, aren't we? And somewhere in there, I decided that I wanted to do this. And to actually find the information for myself took time. But, I've done it. I set up my business. My business is busy. It's thriving. The thing that people might want to know about me is I don't actually pay for marketing. Never paid a single penny. So we can attract clients without spending lots of money. That's the one thing that I would want to say to people. But what I feel I want to do now is put all this information in one easy space where people can just go to this one lecture, one video, and gather all the information at once, and then take it from there and build up their own counselling service.
Yeah, and we're very grateful of that, because it's a much needed resource. I heard you say that it took you some time to believe maybe that people would pay for counselling.
Yeah, I think it's because, when you're a student, you've got to do all these hours free of charge, and you've got to work in voluntary agencies. And then I guess it was my mindset and my confidence thinking, would people actually pay me? I had a sense that I was quite good. What I was offering people was good. Clients were coming, they were engaging, they were staying. But would actually people part with their money? So that, for me, that was the first stumble. Like, could I get over that and believe that my skills were worth money? And they are. 100% they are, as are your listeners. So yes, if you're worried about, can I charge? Of course you can. You've worked really hard to get here.
Yes, and we can say lots about the kind of voluntary sector, and lots about the charities who offer counselling. It's fantastic, and
100%.
It's absolutely fantastic. However, there are those people who will pay for it. I don't want to get into the politics of private healthcare on this podcast, but the long and short of it is, if someone wants to pay for something, why shouldn't they pay for it? And it's interesting. I've recently had a plumber visit Counselling Towers, and the plumber had no hesitation in telling me what his worth was as he produced an eye-watering bill for me.
Yeah, and, no hesitation. So I wonder why it is as counsellors that we feel a bit hesitant about putting ourselves out there. We can.
Yeah, absolutely. And people will pay. I worked in private practice for a few years before Counselling Tutor became a bigger part of my work, and I had a steady stream of clients. So I guess the
clients are out there. Okay, we're in the biggest mental health crisis ever. So there's clients out there. People are looking for support. My job here, hopefully, will give you the skills and the confidence to get your website up or your marketing ready so that you can communicate to those clients that you're available and you're willing to help them.
Yes.
That's the trick, isn't it?
So I think the first thing I've come away from already is value who you are, value the fact that you can see who you are.
Yeah. Value your skill set, value your training, value what your experience, because you'll already have probably 100 hours training. Like, value that, and then give it a go. And then you want to go and research all the things that you need to do, and hopefully you're going to find this lecture on Counselling Tutor and get lots of information from it.
Yes, because I guess once you start working for yourself in private practice, you're effectively a business person. And
you're a business owner.
Doesn't mean you drive around in a great big limousine with a great big cigar and a top hat on, but it does mean not yet.
Not yet.
But it does mean that there are certain things you have to think about, and I guess one of the things is costs, isn't it? Because it's easy to see a fee and say, well, that's all my money. But it's like having a pie in your hand, isn't it? You have your pie, and then people come and take slices. Where are the kind of people or situations where slices of that fee pie are slowly eaten away?
Okay, so some of the things that we might have to consider and pay, we'll definitely have to pay for supervision, 100%. You have to pay for that. You'll have to pay for your website hosting if you choose to have a website. You will, if you're hiring a room, so some people don't see clients from their home, they hire a room, so you might have room costs that you might have to pay for that. There's obviously an unlimited supply of tissues that you have to produce. And these are the main ones that I can think off the top of my head. But it's interesting that you're asking me those questions, because the two questions I always get asked as soon as I say to somebody, oh, I'm a counsellor and I work from home, the two questions I get asked is like, oh, do you not feel weird with like the public coming to your house? So like a safety question. And then the other question that I get asked all the time is like, how do you get clients? Like, they're the two biggest questions that people ask me. Yeah. So I always answer by saying, we need to create no matter where you see clients, we need to work really hard on like a lone working policy. We need to keep ourselves safe, because quite often we're working in isolation, aren't we? Unless you're lucky enough to work in a building where there's other therapists. But most of us will be working in isolation. So I have to reassure friends and family that, I'm safe. It's okay. I've got a really good lone working policy. And then the biggest question, everybody's like, yeah, but Nicola, how do I get clients? And then so we look at marketing, and marketing's huge, right? How do we communicate to the person that's sitting home feeling rotten? Okay. How do we reach them? How do we use the right language that will touch their heart, that makes them think, oh, I like the sound of this person, I'm going to get in touch?
Yes. And
also the other thing is, how do we stand out from the masses? So imagine if you're a counsellor and you live in a big city like London or Birmingham, there might be lots of therapists. How do you stand out? How do you make yourself be seen by the people sitting at home that might need your services?
Yeah. I think these are interesting questions, and they're very businessy questions, aren't they?
Yeah, they are businessy, aren't they?
They're businessy questions, and sometimes that can send a shiver down spines of people, and, but unfortunately, I started off with the pie. The pie,
But we'll come back to the pie, sorry. But I do go off in tangents.
But the fact of the matter is, these are the questions that if you want to sustain a private practice, you're going to have to think about. You're going to have to think of yourself as a small business person and devote your time to certain areas, I guess, of your business, marketing, website,
Staying safe. I can guarantee you, if you're thinking about setting up private practice and you start telling your family and friends, the first thing they're going to say to you is, "Oh, are you sure?" Because they're concerned that they're going to be okay, and you are going to be okay.
Yeah. And I think that links into a bit of a stigma about mental health, isn't it?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
That
people's fear. Yeah,
fear.
Yeah.
Everybody who you're going to see is going to be a potential axe murderer.
Yeah, yeah.
And that isn't the case.
Absolutely not the case. Absolutely not the case. Yeah.
And with a few simple, a bit of thoughtfulness, you can build in loan working policies and
easy peasy. Yeah. And it doesn't take much. Yeah, it really doesn't take much and you can, your supervisor can help you with that. There'll be things on Counselling Tutor that can help you with that. Loads of people there to help you set up something that keeps you safe, but actually we're pretty safe.
Yeah. And you can I think after a time you could get a sense of who your clients are, and for sure. I think if you work in the private world, you will get an amount of people who perhaps, shall we say, need other services but counselling. A more fetishistic approach, but you soon you can soon tell who those are. So we talked about marketing, we've talked about working safely, we've talked about maybe a website. I mean, a good website, is that something which you would say is important to a therapist?
So that is something that I actually talk about in the lecture. And I ask the question, do we need a website? And, the short answer is no, you absolutely don't need a website. Like, you can get clients by word of mouth, you can get clients through social media. So you absolutely do not need a website. You definitely do not need to spend thousands of pounds on a website. I don't know if many people know this, but if you get a Google business profile, you can get a one-page website with Google, right? So there's really cheap ways of getting a website. But here's why I think a website is really useful, okay? Because if you imagine you were looking for a counsellor yourself, just say you were needing a bit of help or you needed a bit of support, you think, all right, I'm going to get myself a therapist. Chances are the first place you're going to go is Google, okay? I did. Every time I've wanted a counsellor, I've gone straight to Google. So what Google does is produce websites, okay? So if you want to be found by Google, you probably do need a website. But yeah, don't spend loads of money and keep it simple. And it's about using the language on the website that your client is going to be drawn to. So what you can do on a website is a great place to describe your services, isn't it? Like, a client might be having questions about you and about what you're offering, but you can put all that information on the website. So they've got all the information before they even get in touch. So they're already starting to think, oh yeah, they're going to meet my needs. Yeah, they have evening appointments. That's definitely what I'm looking for. So they'll get their questions answered before they get in touch. So they're not wasting your time or their time. So for me, I think a website's a really good place to put all your information and to be found by Google.
Yes, and I think it would be a missed opportunity if I didn't mention the fact that we have a sponsor called Web Healer who make websites.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah.
So what we'll do is
heard about them. Amazing. Great.
We'll put a link into the show notes of this site. So if you go to the show notes, we will on counsellingtutor.com. We will.
So my guess is Counselling Tutor think a website's a great idea too.
Well, the thing is that, as you say, most people go to Google
100%.
or a search engine to find a therapist.
Service, yeah.
And a well keyworded website will get you into the top search. I mean, that's the thing.
100%, yeah.
And if you're offering and you're speaking in the language of your clients, they're more likely to be drawn to you. And I think that's really important, which kind of brings me to my next question. Do you think that having a speciality is useful as a private practitioner? Some people are child therapists, some people are trauma-informed practitioners, some people work with marriage. Is there a kind of commercial advantage in having a speciality as opposed to being a generic therapist?
That's an interesting question. Do you know, if that's your speciality, that's who your target audience is. That's who you're communicating to. So you will definitely meet the needs of those clients. Would it mean you would have less clients? I doubt it. You would just have clients in that area.
Yeah.
So, like, absolutely, if you've got a speciality, go for it. In fact, that's probably your unique selling point. That's what you want to promote.
Yeah.
Actually, if I was being honest, that would be your strength.
Yeah.
That would be what would set you out from the masses. You know, like
Yeah.
if you were looking at a directory and there's hundreds of counsellors, your speciality would be maybe what that one client was looking for. So, don't ever see that as a hindrance.
No, it's quite interesting. Towards the end of my, I don't practice privately anymore, but towards the end of it, I was getting more specific requests. I don't know if you're finding this.
Yeah.
Can you do couples? Lots of couple work. Do you do anything around anger management? Do you do anything around post-traumatic stress or anxiety? And I think that clients are getting more discerning now.
Definitely, which is a great thing, isn't it? And if you have a strength in one area, like, go for it, promote it, like, definitely talk about it, shout about it, like, tell people that that's your strength, and you will attract those clients for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of leads into the ethical side of it, because we're all asked to do CPD, and I think that CPD is a wonderful way of kind of developing a unique selling point. You might have an area that you're really passionate in. I interviewed Daniel Hans the other week, and he does use of games in therapy. And he working with children, fantastic
Amazing
perspective. But I'm sure, and I'm not speaking for Daniel here, but I am sure that he would say that is a specific specialism he has that people are attracted to.
Definitely. Yeah, and CPD is really important, isn't it? We should never become stagnant. We should always be growing and developing and getting stretched and challenged and questioning our practice all the time. So CPD is hugely important.
Sure.
Especially because I think when you set up in private practice, you're now no longer protected by your training provider.
True.
And so you're kind of on your own, and that is kind of one of the disadvantages of being self-employed, is the isolation. So CPD connects you to other therapists, keeps you learning, keeps you growing. So 100% CPD is the way to go all the way.
Yes, absolutely. And as I say, it can be quite an isolating work. You meet a client, then you meet your supervisor, and it's important to get a wide range of contacts, whether that's
definitely.
There's local organisations, local councillors have meetups, that type of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Always very useful. So as we come to the end of our interview, I could talk for hours about this.
Yeah, this is great. I'm loving it.
As we come to the end of our interview, people who are watching your lecture, what do you hope that they will take away from it?
Okay, so my hope would be that they're reassured that they have the confidence to give it a go, because we need you. Like, there's a big crisis out there of people struggling, so we need you. So definitely have the confidence to give it a go. Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. My hope would be that they get all the information that they need in one easy place. The way I've set up the lecture is there's kind of like an order that flows, and dip in and out of it as you will. But if you do it in this order, like, things will fall into place automatically. So people want to jump straight to the how to attract clients, Nicola. Well, we'll get there. Just slow it down a little bit. And I want you to think about your services. What are you offering? Who are your clients? Who are you going to be talking to? Once you've got the answers to those questions, then we can market that. But if we don't know what we're offering, how do we market it? And then I've listed all the policies that we're going to need and the order that we need to do things. So my hope would be that people would feel comfortable with the flow of the lecture and know the process to take their business in. Well, that would be my hope. And then they'd have the guts to do it, because definitely give it a go.
Well, I think anybody who's listening to you, Nicola, would be enthused beyond belief by your enthusiasm for private practice. Setting up in private practice by Nicola Currie is in our Counsellor CPD library. And it just goes for me to say, Nicola Currie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely.
Massive thank you to Nicola Currie. Thank you to you, Rory, for being the person who kind of reaches out and has these interesting and very informative and important conversations with our very valued guests. And just a reminder that if you enjoyed what Nicola had to say, Nicola has done an entire lecture on the basics of starting yourself in private practice, and that is available in our Counsellor CPD Library. That is for qualified practitioners only. If you want more information of that, just go to counsellingtutor.com. All the information is there, and I can share with you for less than the price of a cup of coffee with a friend once a month, you can have access to Nicola's lecture as well as a whole incredible library of continuing professional development, all delivered by top professionals in their fields and in their interest areas and topics. So this has been the Counselling Tutor Podcast, episode 277.
Yes, we started off with student services and we talked about the difference between confidentiality and secrecy. We moved on to ethical, sustainable practice, and we talked about the tricky area of taking payment and the confidentiality and the mechanisms you may have to put in place to run a sustainable small business. And then in Practice Matters, we caught up with Nicola Currie, who has done a fab lecture in the CPD library on setting up a private practice. If you like our podcast, why not leave us a 5-star review on iTunes if that's your place of listening, or wherever you've got your podcast downloaded from. And also, why not share us across your social media platform. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.